Hello and welcome back to Caffeinated Hi-Fi. As always, links for everything I talk about today will be in the description, and feel free to use chapters to skip around to the good stuff, and don't forget to like and subscribe. So these are the Swan M200 Mark II Wi-Fi edition. They are, at the time of filming this, a $300 self-powered monitor. If you watched my unboxing of these just a couple of weeks ago, they were $180 at the time, and that was listed as their regular non-sale price. So welcome to Hi-Fi. So these are another really good soundbar killer. That's a really low bar to clear, but they are just a really good set of speakers that are just as easy to set up as a soundbar. It doesn't matter if you bought a Sonos or any other multi-$1,000 soundbar, you're still watching movies in mono, and I just can't abide by that. With speakers, you get true stereo separation of sound. Soundbars, they're just not good. They're all bad. They're overpriced, and they're not even any more convenient than a good set of speakers like these. So let's take a look. So this is the main powered unit of the two speakers. As you can see here, you've got a volume control. You really don't ever touch this. This is mostly something you just kind of set once and forget it. And you can also use the remote here to adjust the volume as well. On the back, you have your two auxiliary inputs via RCA, a coaxial digital input, optical, which is what I use these with, and a LAN. You can use these as a network speaker and play music over the network, which I think is really cool. And then obviously you've got your power switch, power plug, and the screw-in connector, which is used to connect the main unit to the slave unit over here. So these are built really well. They're made out of MDF, but they don't feel cheap at all, and I think they look expensive. The hardware feels high quality as well. The only thing that doesn't really feel well made is the screw-on connector that connects the two speakers together. The threading on there gets a little bit rough, but honestly, once it's screwed in place, you don't need to touch it ever again, so it's not that big of a deal. The black finish on the main part of the enclosure is kind of a satin finish, and I think it makes it feel really expensive. The wood paneling on the side is not real. It's an MDF with a veneer on top of it. But as long as you don't look at it too close or touch it, it feels like real wood, and honestly, once you're sitting on your couch, it looks like real wood. I think these are sexy speakers, and I really appreciate that they took the time to make these look good. I honestly think these will look good in pretty much any living room, and I like that they almost have kind of a mid-century modern aesthetic going for them. So getting into how these sound, I'm going to talk about how they sound on a desk first. I approve of these on a desk, but only if they're under $200. They're not the best speakers Swan has to offer on a desk, but they're still pretty good. Swan has, I think, two sets of speakers in this price range. However, they kind of have a hard time keeping anything in their lineup in stock. Honestly, when it comes to shopping for speakers for your desk, I would just say when it comes to Swan, buy whatever is in your budget and in stock at the time. Now, the bass that these are capable of producing really requires some distance, so when you're sitting up close at a desk, they don't really have a whole lot of low end. Sitting up close, they get a lot brighter, and a lot of that low end that they're capable of producing, it just kind of isn't there. However, when you're sitting at a desk, the imaging actually gets way better. Swan speakers have this ability to almost make it sound like your monitor is what's producing sound. And so it's that center imaging that they kind of produce. So I was listening to the song Popular from the Wicked Broadway cast recording, and Kristen Chenoweth's voice sounded like it was coming like right out of the center of my monitor. And then Idina Menzel sounded like she was coming just right of center. It's really cool to listen to. And like I said, you can look straight at your computer monitor and it sounds like the sound is coming straight out of the middle. The imaging on these is just really good. You know, things can sound perfectly center, but they can also sound just barely off center, and then they can perfectly pan from left to right. I mean, the imaging on these speakers is just really good. Sometimes with speakers, you can look directly at the speaker and kind of go, oh yeah, that's where they're coming from, and it kind of loses that illusion of imaging. But with these, I can stare directly at the speaker, and my brain is still telling me that the sound is coming from the center of my monitor, and they're just really fun to listen to. So in a desk use case, if you can find them cheap, meaning under $200, I would say yes, these are good enough. Again, these aren't the best desktop speakers that Swan produces. Something like the D1080s are a much better desktop speaker. However, like I said, the Finding Swans in stock is kind of difficult, and then also finding them in the right price is difficult. So whatever is cheaper and in stock at the time, I would say specifically for a desktop use case, buy those instead. So using these in a living room setting, I'm going to talk about Music Performance Force because honestly, it's not their forte. They're still very good for music, it just gets a little bit inconsistent. So the TLDR for this section is they're very good for music, it's just complicated. Sometimes they're punching way above their weight, and then other times they just get kind of meh. However, they only sound meh comparison to their peak, and meh on these is still above average compared to most speakers. So if you want to hear me go into the detail about how these sound for music, keep watching. However, if you're looking for home theater speakers and that's what you're here to hear me talk about, feel free to use the chapters to skip ahead. Just keep in mind, I feel like these are much better for home theater use, and I'm going to be recommending them for that, not for a dedicated music listening experience. So when listening to music with these are way better than you could ever ask for a $300 plug and play set of speakers. I mean, the low end and the detail that these produce is just stupid. However, the low end, while very impressive, does have a very obvious roll off when it comes to sub bass, and that can actually be a bit of a buzzkill. So for one specific example, listening to the song Me and Your Mama by Childish Gambino, those big heavy bass notes, those are more in the sub bass range. You can still hear those notes playing, but that thick rumble that goes along with it, I mean, they just can't really produce that, it's too low. So in songs where the sub bass is really important, these can't produce that and they kind of just fall asleep. However, it's hard to fault them though because they still produce way more low end than most speakers in this price range could ever hope to produce on their own. They just produce so much low end that when they can't produce, it gets a little bit disappointing. They do, however, have this ability to throw this wall of sound at you. So my favorite song to listen to on these is Strobe by Deadmau5. It has a lot of dynamic range and a lot of detailed sounds in the beginning, and then when the chorus hits, it just fills the room with sound, and it's really fun to listen to. They're throwing out tons of bass without sounding muddy and maintaining those clarity in the highs. I had a real moment when listening to these speakers. It was like getting wrapped in this warm hug of sound, and it was really fun to listen to. But the problem comes with the mid-range, and they have no timbre in the mid-range, and that's really where these start to fall apart. If you don't remember what timbre is the ability to discern sounds that are really close together in the same frequency range, and is sometimes referred to as the space between sounds. So what that translates to specifically with these speakers is if you have music that isn't recorded particularly well, they kind of just start sounding flat and boring. So if you're listening to music that's just recorded in a way where everything's cranked, everything kind of just starts to mush together and sound muddy. At times, these actually made me not want to listen to certain songs just because I could hear that the song wasn't recorded well. But again, as I said earlier, at their worst, they're still way above average compared to most speakers in this price range. It's just such a stark contrast from what they sound like at their best that you really start to notice things at their worst. So if you have a song playing that really plays to their strengths, and then the next song on your playlist is something that isn't particularly well recorded, you're definitely going to notice the difference. So that's a lot of gripes, but I feel like they're relatively small and forgivable, and honestly, I don't recommend these for critical listening to music anyways. These are really more for a home theater speaker, in my opinion. So at the end of the day, they're still very good for listening to music. I'm just pointing out the caveats because I feel like they're important to know. So getting into how these sound from movies. If you watched the portion of the video where I talked about how they sound for music, I want you to take everything bad I had to say about these speakers and purge that from your memory and just throw that out the window because they absolutely do not translate to how these sound for movies. It's extremely difficult to overstate just how good the imaging on these speakers are, and one of the things these do extremely well is creating what's called a phantom center channel. And what that is when your two front speakers work together to make it sound like you have a speaker floating in the middle. And these do that extremely well, and that's where vocals exist. So these, when you're watching movies, it sounds like the vocals are coming straight out of the center of your TV. But that's not even where the fun ends. Again, they also track perfectly from left to right. I was watching Mad Max Fury Road, and there was multiple times where I could hear a sound directly in the center, and then it would gradually just fade off to the side. I mean, the imaging on these is really good. And not only that, there were times that it almost sounded like I had side channels. So when you have these big, really loud scenes and they have a lot of time to reverberate sound, these were actually almost making it sound like I had speakers on either side of me kind of bouncing inwards. And that is not easy to accomplish, especially in speakers under $500. The tweeters that they put in these are amazing. The treble is like, it's textured and things sounded tangible. I mean, yeah, bass is fun and it's impressive, but treble is every bit as important. I mean, I was watching Mad Max and that engine revving, like it was almost anxiety inducing. The popping and the crackling of those engine revs, it almost sounded real. But I mean, that low end though. If you skip the part where I talked about how they sound for music, I mentioned that they have bass, but there's an obvious roll off when it comes to sub bass. That is absolutely not a problem when it comes to watching movies on these. I had a friend over the other day and I was trying to convince him that he was a bad person for owning a soundbar. And so I had him sit and watch a few scenes of Tron until he realized, yes, he is indeed a bad person for owning a soundbar. Not only do they produce a lot of low end, it's tight and controlled. Nothing sounds muddy or floppy. I mean, it's just really smooth and fast bass. So overall, movie performance is phenomenal. They are an absolute soundbar killer, and they're probably one of the best soundbar killers in their price range. If you can find these under $200, buy them immediately. Throw your wallet at the screen and just get them. However, for $300, they are still an absolute steal. So in conclusion, these are an absolute no-brainer buy if you're looking for something that's just plug and play and under $500. They're fine on a desk, but again, only if you can find them for under $200. And you're probably not going to sit and have a critical listening session to your FLAC library, but again, that's really not what these are good for. What they are good for is going from the built-in speakers on your TV to a real home theater listening experience with one relatively inexpensive purchase. So that's going to wrap it up for me here today. Again, thank you so much for watching. As always, everything I talked about today is linked in the description. Please like and subscribe. It does really help me out a lot. Feel free to leave a comment. If you just want to say hi or if you want recommendations, I'm happy to do that as well. Also, if you want to check me out on social media, I'm on Twitter and Instagram, and I'll put those on screen now. And with that, I will catch you guys in the next one. Later.